So then he goes on to say, earliest and most important of the biblical texts that have been discovered would be what's called Codex Sinaiticus, where it was discovered on Mount Sinai. This would be about 350, and it's the whole New Testament. 325, Codex Vaticanus, both the New Testament and the Old Testament. MacArthur is bringing these two up because that's what he's been taught, I suspect.
Yeah, and that's another point, actually, as we're talking about what MacArthur's been taught. I think the other sort of thing to contextualize his message is that he's also trying to bring, and I'm trying to be charitable here. He's also trying to bring a rather complicated discussion in the form of a sermon on a Sunday morning, right? The people in the congregation, I'm willing to bet that 80% of the people in there don't really care a whole lot about this discussion. And a Sunday morning is not typically the time where you discuss these sorts of things. So I think John MacArthur is very likely, for lack of a better word, he's kind of dumbing it down and making the arguments very simple, as you should if you're in that scenario. So I mean, there's obviously still some factual errors and such that need to be addressed.
This is Hort's introduction. Nobody would pick this up and try to preach it. But what MacArthur is doing is trying to dumb down or simplify things that Hort said. Hort raised up Sinaiticus and Vaticanus to a very high level of importance because they are both, for the most part, good representatives of the text of Alexandria, the Alexandrian text. But there are some other things wrong with MacArthur's statements. First, when he says the earliest and most important biblical texts have been discovered in the Vaticanus and Sanaiticus, some people might think of that they're older than say the Dead Sea Scrolls, which they're not. Some people might think they're older than the papyri. No, they're younger than a lot of papyri. P45, P46, P75. Most scholars, at least the ones that were contributing to Mestre, most of them would date P45 older than Sinaiticus. We have P52, which is just a little scrap, but it's still older than Vaticanus and Sanaiticus. That certainly should be clarified, that these are not the oldest biblical texts. These are the oldest big Bibles that we have. Now, Vaticanus is not both the Old and New Testament. It has the Old Testament, it has a lot of the New Testament, but Revelation, not there. Hebrews after 9:14, not there. So Vaticanus is not both the Old and New Testament. It's the Old Testament and a lot of the New Testament, because Vaticanus also has the books of the Apocrypha in it. Now, that's not because Vaticanus' fault. Practically all Old Testament manuscripts were like that, because they were written in Greek. Most Greek Old Testament manuscripts were like that, because they're based on the Septuagint. Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts are another story. But all these things need to be clarified. Also, it should be pointed out, in Sinaiticus, you have Old Testament, New Testament, and Barnabas and parts of the Shipwreck of Hermas. So the next thing MacArthur said is there are 8,000 copies of Jerome's Vulgate, by translation, made in from 382 to about 405. A Vulgate means common in Latin. It was the common translation of the Roman Catholic Church for a long time. So you have 8,000 copies going back to the 4th century. When MacArthur says going back to the 4th century, that means that's when the Vulgate itself was made. The copies we have don't go back to the 4th century. The copies we have are later copies. But Jerome's copies were made before 383. And if you examine copies of the Vulgate, those 8,000 copies, you will find in each and every one, unless it's damaged, each and every one contains Mark 16, 9 through 20. The passage that MacArthur is trying to tell you that does not belong there.
So the Latin Vulgate, every single manuscript that contains the ending of Mark has the full ending from 9 to 20.
Unless it's damaged. I think at Yale in the Banacate library there's a copy that's damaged, but that's damage.
Right.
There are 1,000 of copies of the Vulgate that have Mark 16, 9 through 20, and there's no question about it. That's what Jerome had in the manuscripts he used to make the Vulgate. Now, Jerome tells us, because he wrote a preface to his Gospels, and he says, I used, as I was making this, ancient Greek copies. Now, Jerome himself was born in, I think, 341. So these would be copies in Greek older than Jerome. Because usually we say, well, if a copy has been made while I was live, it would be a younger copy. So we're talking about copies that would thus be older than Codex Sinaiticus.
I think I was watching Mike Winger's video. I do want to talk a little bit about Mike Winger's video, and we'll do that in a bit. But in his video, he talked a little bit about Jerome, and he wasn't exactly committed to the idea that Mark 16:9-20 was original or not.
That's
Jerome
because
was
Mike Winger misunderstood the evidence. I would like
right.
to discuss it with Mike Winger. At any time he wants to have me on his channel and discuss it, I would be happy to. Why didn't you go through the patristic evidence? He said he would, and he did not. Mike Winger skipped a lot of the patristic evidence, and that is
Right.
unworthy of a person who says he's going to walk you through it. He walked around it.
Yeah, well, he walked through some of it, right? I think he went through some of the main figures,
it, but he left out so much.
yeah.
Getting back to MacArthur, MacArthur said there are 350 plus copies of the Syriac Bible. Syriac is a dialect of Aramaic, and it would have been very close to the language Jesus spoke. Then he said there are 350 copies that go back to the 200s, very ancient manuscripts. Now, again, his wording, John MacArthur's wording here is misleading. I don't mean he tried to mislead, but that was the effect, because we do not have 350 Syriac copies made in the 200s. Some folks think that the Peshitta was made in the 200s, but it was more likely produced in the late 300s and was standardized in the 400s. But either way, all undamaged copies of the Peshitta include Mark 16:9-20. There's only one Syriac manuscript of Mark that ends the text in 16:8. That's the Sinaitic Syriac. It's not a Peshitta manuscript. That's a different manuscript entirely. Well, not entirely, because it's still Syriac, but it's different. It's also very unreliable. If you've ever gone through the apparatus of the New Testament and looked and seen the readings of the Sinaitic Syriac, you see that it has a whole lot of anomalies. Well, then MacArthur said, when you compare all of these manuscripts, they're all saying the same thing. Let me say that again. John MacArthur says, when you compare all these manuscripts, they're all saying exactly the same thing. Let's think about this for a second. 8,000 Vulgate copies of Mark include Mark 16:9-20. The normal text of Mark and over 99% of the Syriac manuscripts, whether you're using Syriac Peshitta or the Harkland Syriac, they also include Mark 16:9-20. But then John MacArthur says we should erase Mark 16:9-20 because of all those Latin and Syriac manuscripts. It's like Dr. MacArthur, open your eyes. Those manuscripts include Mark 16:9-20.
It seems like John MacArthur was making a number of generalizations in his sermon, and then he applied those generalizations to Mark 16:9-20 when they don't fit. If I'm not mistaken, I think I might make a few people angry here. But when he did his Strange Fire conference, this was going back like 10 years now. That was the same sort of complaint then, was that he took continuationists and then he broad brushed them all and generalized them into some of the wackier stuff. And of course, most of the continuationists I know wouldn't go as far as to be one of these people that MacArthur was lambasting in the Strange Fire conference. But it just seems like he generalizes things. Now, I'm not sure if that's just because he's trying to appeal to a certain audience or what it is, but he seems to be doing that in his sermon on Mark 16:9-20. He's generalizing the manuscripts, and then in doing so is making them say things that they don't actually say. Specifically, that 16:9-20 is missing from everything. It's clearly not.
Right. It's clearly not. But if you just listen to his sermon, you would think it is. In reality, it's not, because he's not connected to reality. So, now that's putting it rather strongly, but I think you get the idea.
Yeah.
So moving on, MacArthur then made the claim about church fathers quoting from the New Testament. And he said, in fact, there are so many quotations, so many quotes, 32,000 of them, you can virtually put the entire New Testament together from the quotes of the fathers, and it matches perfectly all other manuscript sources. Although MacArthur presented this as if it's a fact, it is fiction. It's one of those things that a person who is honest and well-informed cannot say.
Now, wasn't that something that Burgon was trying to do before he died, was to pull together all the quotations from the early church fathers and try to categorize them?
Yes, but Burgon would never say all the quotations agree, because Burgon knew very well they don't.
Right.
Anybody who goes through a textual apparatus and sees the father's quotations knows that they don't.
Now, the only other person I've heard say that would be Dan Wallace. I think I heard him in a discussion on textual criticism suggest that if you'd wave our magic wand and make all the manuscripts go away, we could still reconstruct the whole New Testament from the quotes of the church fathers. Not verbatim, but pretty close to what he suggested. So perhaps John MacArthur got that idea from Dan Wallace.
I don't know. I like to tackle. I can only make one tackle at a time. The early church fathers disagree about hundreds of readings. An elementary investigation of the evidence will demonstrate this beyond a shadow of a doubt. Like I said, just go through your Nestle Aland apparatus. I'll just go through your QBS apparatus, and you'll see this father disagrees with this father. Sometimes even the same writer quotes the same passage in at least two different ways. So again, because this claim is just absurd, I don't know how anybody could make that kind of claim and then pretend to be well informed. MacArthur asks, why would the Holy Spirit go to the trouble of inspiring it and then not providentially protect it? Now, this is John MacArthur's question, not mine. Let's apply it to the evidence at hand. If that is your position, that the most preserved text must be the most inspired text, aren't you implying, John, that the Holy Spirit has been very negligent if you reject Mark 16, 9-20? Now again, I'm working from John MacArthur's premise. If you reject Mark 16, 9-20, then you have to admit that God allowed 12 uninspired verses to corrupt thousands of copies of the Vulgate, and hundreds of copies of the Syriac, and dozens of copies in Ethiopic, every Greek manuscript of the Gospel of Mark that has survived to the present day, except 3, and really 2. The position implied by that line of reasoning is the exact opposite of the position that's being presented by John MacArthur. Now next, MacArthur made a comparison of the New Testament manuscripts to the manuscripts of the Illiad. He said, Homer's Illiad was written in the 8th century BC. The oldest manuscript we have is in the 13th century AD, 2,000 years later. We don't have anything between the 13th century and the 8th century BC of Homer's Illiad. Now that's gibberish. There are over 24 fragments of the Illiad way before the 13th century AD. Alexandrian Papyrus 560, for example. That's from the 200s.
Right.
Does nobody at Master Seminary aware of this? Does nobody know this? Are all just keeping quiet because I better keep quiet because they might fire me? Are y'all cowards? Is nobody speaking up? Come on, people. Grow a spine. Speak up. All right.
We're making you angry, James. We're making you angry. We want to see some fire come out of your mouth and some smoke out your ears.
I'm working on it.
All right.
So, grace to you people, Master Seminary people. I thought your slogan was, because truth matters. Well, don't just tell me it does. Show me it does. Don't continue to circulate false statements like you're doing right now on YouTube by spreading the sermon around. Now, John MacArthur went on to describe the manuscript this way. He said, look at the Bible. We have so many, and again, I stress, we have so many consistent manuscripts that we know without hesitation that what we hold in our hands is an English translation of the original with no loss. Now notice, he is using number as part of the basis for confidence that the text has not undergone any major changes. And again, it must be pointed out that the proportion of Greek manuscripts that include Mark 16, 9-20 is above 99%. As for accuracy and consistency, it should be noted that Vaticanus and Sanaiticus, I'm really supposed to say Sinaiticus, those two disagree with each other over 3,000 times just in the Gospels.
Right.
So John MacArthur is rejecting testimony of over 1,600 Greek manuscripts and depending on 2, and can't both be accurate copies of the Gospels.
Right.